My friend was kind enough to, a few years ago, print these out for me to try and, I guess, spread awareness, which I think is kind of cute. I've never really worn them before, but I thought they'd be good to wear for the videos. So, yeah, but you can't really see them in this camera view. So, anyway, this video is called Humble Beginnings, and I guess many beginnings are humble, meaning where I started out, I've come a long way since the very beginning. And in this video, I'm going to show some slides of my first attempts at trying to illustrate the mathematics and my first attempts to build the prototypes, which are and were not mathematically based at all. And I didn't even understand what mathematics was back then. I didn't really have a mathematical brain, but I developed a mathematical brain as a requirement in order to solidify the intuition. So I guess all of this is about bridging the two domains, one being science and the other being spirituality. So essentially my work bridges the two realities and allows me to also witness what it is like to be in either reality. Having made friends with many physicists and spiritualists, a lot of the time the two don't get along, or they might have a quarrel in their belief systems. But I argue that in order to gain the most insight, you need to see both realms, because that's essentially the definition of balance. And balance being almost what allows you to actually get somewhere. So, yes, I started off, I guess, more in the spiritual domain. And then after the years went by, the universe taught me that that's only half of the equation, and without the other half, you will not get anything of what you set out to achieve. The same goes with the light and the dark. You must embrace the dark as much as the light in order to find balance within the being. But that's another philosophy, another train of thought. Not for this video. So in the slides that I will show, they have pictures of early prototypes and pictures of graphs and things that I made. But honestly, I started this adventure in probably 2005. So that's like 2006. So 14 or 15 years ago. Around about that time. And yeah, as I said, these models and everything you see, they're all intuitively based. There's no maths at all. I thought in the beginning it's just like the prototypes just had to be approximate. You just build them and they'll work. But it couldn't have been more further from the truth. So I've developed a lot since the beginning, since having no maths at all, and now looking at mathematics as if it's a god. If I was going to worship something, it would probably be the gas argon, actually. Or its configuration, at least. But I'm not going to do that anyway. But yeah, so there's all this stuff which I thought it'd be important to show. So I'm going to show in the coming videos these slides, and then I'm going to show prototype history, actual film footage of the prototypes that I've made, some of them at least. And then the next one I will do will be like evidence of essentially all of my diaries and diagrams and like the countless diagrams that I've produced over the years, just so people can get an idea that it's not just, I didn't just make it up overnight. I've got reams and reams of evidence to suggest at least I've been actually working on this the whole time and not just thinking about it. There's more. I'm really bad at documenting things, so I only have a fraction of what I've ever built recorded on footage. So much of what I've built has come and gone, and it was never captured at all, which is quite funny because it's not important to me, but I have still captured some things and found the photos later on and realized that I've got them. So yeah, it's essentially just a bit of an overview here, and I'll explain a little bit about each photograph and where it all came from. I'll also be touching on the off-world creatures that watch me, or at least are somewhere, and their influence and their original message. And the few times that they've popped up, very rarely do they appear. So that's pretty much it until I see you in the slideshow. And so the symbol on the screen that is seen before thee is the Alpha Omega, which has been already covered. But this is the symbol in the front page, the front cover, inside of the front cover of We the Arcturians. And it just so happens that this is the symbol that the creatures wanted me to see. As mentioned in the introduction, I was driving my car through the forest and they sent me the message to build these machines. They said that they used them themselves for different function. And I could pursue this quest, and I could actually build one and get it working if I made it to the very end of the path, which they didn't tell me how hard it would be, but that's essentially the gist. And this symbol is actually a very vague outline of the vortex drive inside the machine, and is actually an equation as well, which represents balance and polarity, and spin and motion, and a void and a transducer. That'll all be covered in the other technical films. Films prior to this one have been very mathematically based, and now I'm trying to encompass videos that are not as mathematically based for viewers which may not care for the mathematics, but more interested in what I'm actually trying to do without straining the brain too much. So yes, this symbol was super exciting to me. I've hung it on my wall for years, and many people can actually tune to the source by looking at it. So that is the symbol, and before I actually came across the symbol, when I was driving my car through the forest and I got the message, as soon as I came home, I started on this picture, trying to unravel this vision I'd had desperately, and I felt these flows and just this polarity. This picture's a metaphor because it doesn't make any sense on a technical level. The pyramid apex representing the sky, the ground in the sky doesn't make sense. But what I was meaning was that It's connected to the sky. It's fused to the sky and it's fused to the earth through the user. And then in the middle, the tuning representing its configuration in the universe, which tunes it. And then the quartz, and that quartz somehow conveyed information to the body, depicted through the third eye in this picture. And a whole heap of other jargon that just doesn't make sense. But I understand now what I was trying to do. And it makes perfect sense in that respect. But it was just me excited. And that was, I guess, the very beginning of where this started, was this picture. And this real clarity on polarity and the waves and the tuning and the vacuum even, I think's in there. It was all quite clear at the time. So this is the first image I think I produced, or one of them anyway. And yeah, that is that. So this was drawn before I discovered the symbol in the book, which was given to me a few weeks later as promised. Moving on. This image is of a prototype I built many, many years ago in an attempt to, again, this prototype has no mathematics behind it. It is just a copy of the symbol made into 3D by separating the alpha and the omega, and the alpha going through the omega, which is correct. That is how it's meant to be. And the 3 transducers, which is incorrect, but it's still there. It's good. It's close enough to what this is. It's very vague, but it's a start. So that image is the symbol situated in a vacuum chamber with the 3 transducers. And so this prototype was built back in 2008, I think. So quite a while ago. Again, just a very vague attempt. And this is the symbol without its transducers, just sitting on its frame. It looks quite cool, actually. Just like that. And this is an image of the 3 prototypes, which, well, are the 3 of them that have been produced. There's a little one, a bigger one, and an even bigger one. And so the one to the left was actually quite expensive to make. Well, they're all expensive to make, but they're a lot more expensive than you think. And again, these were so incorrect. They are all just intuitively based. And as soon as I figured out I didn't know what I was doing, I just stopped until I said I'd never build one again until I knew exactly what I was doing, because it was clear that there was something missing. However, I did get a result from one, and it was the very first one I built. And it definitely produced a result. But that will be covered in another video. It'll also be covered why I didn't reproduce that one. And there's a very specific reason for that. So, yes, these 3 are just sitting around looking pretty, I guess. But again, all incorrect and all sketches of, or metaphors for something greater that was to come. Moving on to the side view, the Alpha Omega prototype inside the vacuum chamber. And here's an internal view of the other class of pyramid, the one with the disc on each face. The crystal and the transducer and the magnets and the mirror in this image. Moving on. And here there's a prototype. Again, same prototype as in the previous slide. And the approximation of things. This is incorrect but relatively correct when looking at proportions. The crystal's incorrect. The trumpet-looking coils are incorrect. But the conical coil is roughly correct, very vaguely, the frame vaguely, the discs vaguely, the mirrors vaguely, the position of the tube vaguely, but wrong at the same time. But the nature of that configuration is possible and correct and can be built and will produce a result regardless. Moving to the next slide is just a cardboard silver illustration of the Alpha Omega, just for a visual understanding. Sometimes I build things to see what they actually look like, so I can get a grasp on things. And this image is the first prototype I ever tried to build out of scraps and inspiration, essentially. It was just, put together. That was that. The Alpha Omega is made of plastic. It's not even 3D. I didn't even realize it was meant to be 3D. It's just two plastic things sandwiched together. I knew it wasn't going to work, but I wanted to build something. So this is what it was. It was built from very cheap things. And so, just all put together and just for a visual thing, I guess, for fun. Years and years ago, and everything, nothing's even soldered there. It's just sticky taped, and it's quite ridiculous, but it is. I guess when you build something, it's like it just is a form of feedback or something. But that was. I actually had a vacuum chamber. I built that and got that to work, but I didn't even have the writing. This prototype's like a hybrid anyway. It's a fusion between different machines, and it's not even. I mean, I knew it wasn't going to work. It was just fun. Like the Alpha Omega is made of plastic, and I knew that was totally incorrect. But I just thought I'd make it anyway. And here's a later version of that same prototype, and this is the actual design. The nature of this design actually did produce a result. It produced a result, and looking backwards at the mathematics, this prototype was only 6 millimeters away from the correct dimensions of the frame. So intuitively, I went with the 60-degree system because I knew it was the simplest. Before I understood the maths, I was like, it couldn't be complicated because everything's equal. That's why it's called the equilateral triangle. And this is the 60-degree pyramid right here. And so I was just like, I'm just going to start there. And the disc on each face. So the origins of this design actually come from somewhere else. And the origins, obviously, of the design that I got in the vision come from that. But this is actually, information is from somewhere else. And I don't understand this one as much because I'm not connected to it. But I know it's legitimate. And there is some intuition there. But it is not correct. It is totally not correct. And built like this. But in a vague sense, it is. The elements and their rough position are correct. The disc on each face, the copper frame, the conical coil, the tube, etc. Even this salt case, but it's just not set up right in this image. So, yes, this is that system. This is the one that actually did, even in its incorrectness, start producing a field and a measurable effect, not with equipment, but repeatedly measuring the same effect by people and me testing them and getting them to explain a specific thing. But it did actually have a measurable effect, and that was that the tube inside this prototype went black because it wore out because of the waves going on inside, and it started going black. I've built hundreds of those mercury and salt tubes, and only one went black, and it was inside the prototype that worked. So that is very curious to me. But I'll get into this prototype in another video and the effects it produced and its nature. But essentially that was the one. So, and there's me all inspired with the salt case over that prototype. The prototype is within that case. And another image of the older prototype, the first one, just outside in the grass. Again, a side view of the prototype that worked. You can see the mirrors pointing at the tube. Those mirrors aren't correct in this image, but those mirrors and the fact that there are 3 are correct in that nature, but just not illustrated correctly. And there is a reason. The function acts as a filter to separate one standing wave out of white noise, out of the many waves bouncing around. And that will be explained as a dichoric mirror. It will be explained in other videos. Moving on to this slide. So this is I think this one came actually even before the vision in the forest, because before the vision happened in the forest, before that, I was getting ideas and things. And one night at my friend's house, I had this very strong, clear, still image in my head. And it was just so clear. It was like the foundations of a device, and I just had to write it down. There's something with the vertical and horizontal tuning to tune, in other words, which is a metaphor for my brain interpreting X, Y, and Z coordinates or mathematical coordinates. So again, the tuning in this image represented up the top in strange metallic configurations. Then the moon as a power source, a lens converting that moon's energy into a beam running through a crystal, which is somehow tuned by those horizontal and vertical tuning wires. And the coil around the crystal represents that fusion. So the crystal is tuned using that configuration and a coil. And that beam's focusing onto the head of a person sitting in a chair, and that person is sitting in the chair. The chair is also metallic at the base, and so therefore they're grounded to the earth. So they are between the energy of the moon and the earth, and essentially it's an attempt to fuse energy with a position in space-time and have that running through an individual, having the earth and the moon essentially bridged together. And so what's strange was I wrote all this down, drew this one image, and I still have it to this day, luckily, and well, in digital form. And what's so interesting was that I was looking on the internet later on. I found this image. I had never ever seen this before. Never. And this is just an artist's depiction of a temple in Atlantis time. or whatever. And I couldn't help but think that it looked quite similar in many ways, and essentially is the same thing. I think this image is actually called, what's it called? Atlantis Temple or something like that. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. And I do like that image as well. I'm drawn to it. It looks very, very much my style of things. If I was to hang out in a place long term, I'd like it to be something along those lines of the. To me, it represents the subtle realm in many ways, from the moonlight to the crystals to that color of blue. It's quite nice. So, moving on to the creatures. So in this slide, this represents my very line drawn image, which was later modified in paintbrush to add extra detail of colors to give to an artist to draw this as an actual image. This slide is actually a result of a phenomena that happened to me one night in amongst a whole bunch of chaos. And it's another story, but there was an infiltration, so to speak. And in amongst all of that madness, these creatures came to obviously give me a message. And the way they did it was very, very specific and nothing like I'd ever experienced before. It was actually, in my mind, a still image. It was frozen and it was stuck in my mind. And it lasted about a minute. It didn't matter if I opened my eyes and closed them. This image, exactly how it's depicted, was shown to me. It was very clear that the creatures are, I call them the tall blues. They were trying to show me them as a whole and the three types that they have as a whole, and how that can be seen also as a metaphor, and also the color that they assigned. So, and the colors and everything were important. The position of each creature and the symbols that they have in front of them also meaningful. And so this is the best way I could depict what they showed me. And so essentially at the front, number one is the male. I think the male represents the logic of their group, with the blue skin, the maroon cardigan looking thing, and the green glowing keyboard representing obviously mathematics and control. And yeah, I've depicted the creature as a ship commander. And the creature or the being, let's call them beings, the tall blue beings, as a ship commander. So there is he, and then next is the she, the female. Now, the females just to me seem the most powerful of all. So intimidating, because what they're holding, what she was holding, was a galaxy, an entire galaxy, as if she had power over the entire galaxy or something. And just holding it up, connected to the center, like as you can see, like little vortex goes in there. And somehow that's how they were communicating with me, was through the galaxy, through her control or access to the galaxy, through her access to the grids, however that was achieved, obviously with mind or machine. And that's how they were sending me such a stable image, which was so clearly locked in my brain, obviously it was going through the female system, whatever that means. But there are images that support that. So, yes, there's a little thing of me in the corner, as you can see. And that is the represents how she somehow connected to me through this invisible web, through the center of the galaxy. And so that's the females. They like purple and red, as you can see. And again, they have blue skin. And going to the third class of creature or being in their system is what I've called the citizen or the child. And this being had like a pinkish aura and almost greenish skin. So it's kind of weird. I don't know if it's a child or the citizen or part of them, but it is part of them in this system. But what's interesting is the grid behind is yellow and gold. And that's exactly how the grid's represented. Based on the maths in the prior videos, it is violet and gold. And it's represented in a grid. So that's really cool because that grid was so specific and it was all wavy and it was those colors. And those are the colors actually years later discovered are very much married together. And the foundations actually behind the machine that these creatures use. These creatures use a very specific machine that resembles the color of their skin, which is a sky blue. That's the carrier wave, and it operates off of the third harmonic of, well, the second harmonic of the Planck length, which is gold in color. So those three colors, blue, violet, and gold, are actually the colors that represent the machine that these creatures use. And so it's interesting that this image depicts that, but later on, years later, about 10 years later, the maths very clearly illustrates that those are the three colors used in the machine, or the mathematical equivalents. So that's this image. I've had events and experiences in the night and in the day and all over, but this is one of the more special ones because of the nature of the transmission and the fact that the slide that they sent was static. It wasn't moving at all. It was frozen. And I've never ever seen anything in my mind that's been frozen before. It's always moving and morphing and becoming something else. But this was stuck. And it was exactly how... This is the best way I could depict it. But then, moving to the next slide, we have... Oh, yes. This is an artist's version of that. What I gave didn't really turn out the way that I wanted too much, but I still appreciate it. It was done, but it's a painting of what I had seen. I was trying to convert it into a painting, so it looked a bit better, but it's not quite 100%. But yeah, this is pretty much it. Let's just say this is what I saw in the dream, essentially. Close enough for now. And moving on, there's another image of a being that I found, again with the same ruby necklace around her neck, which is so bizarre. That's how I saw it. So I don't know who she is, but she looks awfully similar to the female that I saw holding the galaxy. And another image, I know this image is blurry, but this is probably the best depiction of what they look like that I found on the internet. The slimness, the color of the skin, the vibe, everything. I think this would be it. This would be the one that reminds me the most of them being the tall blues, and I would assume they were the ones that sent me the message in the first place. Whether it was the Arcturians, it's unknown, but these creatures, regardless of their name, I know it's them. This is what they look like. They're tall, they're blue. And this image depicts what was seen by a friend of mine without even knowing what the symbol was. He saw the symbol and he produced, well, I drew this, but he produced this image in detail. The details given were this image, and there would have been a rough sketch, but I've obviously made it a bit clearer in the original, but it was this. And he said he saw a female inside a pyramid in like a giant egg thing at approximately that height. There was some holographic crystal gold thing beaming down from the top. The Alpha Omega symbol and some like reflective holographic dish at the bottom inside a pyramid. So that's it. That's the first person that was to ever look at the symbol and say that they saw a pyramid with a female being inside of it without me saying to them what the symbol was, but them going into a spell almost, feeling like they were actually inside the machine and trying to explain it. So that was super curious to me and really cool and really inspiring that I wasn't just on a path in the beginning that was made up. As time went on, the mathematics and everything validated everything. But in the beginning it was tricky. It was very hard to know what was going on. So, moving on, this image also surprised me very much because I found it later, years later, and it's a blue being holding a galaxy, which again is very curious because the blue female that I saw was holding a galaxy too. She's also blue. So, moving on to the technical diagrams. So, when this all started for me, my intuition was very, very strong, and it was trying to churn out these things, and so I was trying to depict things. Again, I didn't have any of the maths or any understanding of anything, but I was just drawing these images. So, this is an attempt to understand how geometry and the grid system tunes in space-time, but it's more of a metaphor. But again, it's correct to a degree, but it's a metaphor. It's not geometrically correct, but it's just a point of curiosity. Moving to the next one, just a side view of a pyramid design, which is totally incorrect in every way. But I still built it and learnt these things. Learnt things must be correct. This is a slide of my obsession with polarity and how that's how you access the void or the hyperdimensions, and that seemed very clear to me in the beginning. You have to cancel out the poles, but you have to have motion. You have to create a void with a transducer in it, and then you access the grid, and that's essentially what this was attempting to explain. Oh, another little image mixed up with these slides is a plastic prototype without anything in it. Nothing at all, not even air. And a circuit for the prototype that produced the results in all of its glorious detail. And here's an image depicting two people telepathically communicating over great distances by understanding that the concept of the pyramids in operation, there is no distance, and the geometry is fused because they operate in a place of non-time space. So those machines are fused regardless of their distance. Think of it as a modulated quantum entanglement set up and possible only because the correct parameters have been met. And these beings are holding the machine in such a way that their aura is passing through them from the base to the apex in order to interact and interface. And in a sense, because of this, these beings are fused together temporarily because they are using something to entrain them both to the same carrier frequency. And in this slide, there is a depiction of, I guess, my very first attempt to understand or even create a pyramid from the Alpha Omega symbol using what I knew at the time. And yeah, I thought this was like close to the actual design, but it's about 1,000,000,000,000 miles away from what needed to be done. But I just kept going, and it slowly evolved through the years. Again, there's no mathematics at all behind this system. There appears to be, but nothing with any foundation. It was all quite simply just guesswork and intuition. And again, this image depicts how the third dimension and the hyperdimensions must be mirrored in order for the machines to work, and how both dimensions must have simultaneous action happening in them that's both synchronized at the same time. And the reason for this is to create a pressure fluctuation and a transduction between the hyperdimension and this dimension, because that's how this works. That's how the transmission is achievable. I think this image is pretty good. It's not correct, but it's pretty good at trying to explain it, considering it was at the very beginning. It's still the concept is still relatively correct. And although the nature of what the components are doing is not correct, the mirror in concept is very much correct and a good visual tool to understand what the pyramid's doing in the hyperdimensions and also in this dimension, being the atomic dimension. And so the hyperdimensions are all pressure and geometry. This dimension is like electrons, electromagnetism, atoms, etc. And yeah, you synchronize them to get a result. And that is, in part, how it all works. And this is an illustration of one of the most fascinating components in the machine, which is known as the file, which is the mercury and salt-based transducer inside an evacuated tube, and backfilled, in this case, with argon. This component I will feature specific videos on because it actually physically works as a transducer and can be tested and measured and experimented with. It produces real results, which I'll be very excited to share with everyone for the first time visually. The results in which it produces, which can be physically seen and measured using radio equipment and an oscilloscope. So yes, this component is responsible for intercepting fluctuations, or basically it's like a thought microphone essentially, which Jan, a researcher, calls it, which is It's like a speaker and a microphone at the same time, but it is like the interference input into the system, which allows signals to be put into the system and not just the oscillator of the quartz sending out the wave. This is what allows the information to go in and out of the system so that intelligent information can be relayed and amplified in the standing wave cavity. This is the component for it, and it's that simple. It's even simpler than depicted. This is a more complex version. It is simply just salt and mercury in an evacuated tube of the correct dimensions with an electrode, a platinum electrode in either end to allow the field to be conducted from one end to the other. And it's incredibly sensitive to vibration. It transduces pressure to electromagnetic waves, and that is what it does very accurately and very sensitively as well. But again, this will all be covered in other videos. And this is like a flow system of how the aura of a human is intercepted by the pyramid and how it flows around the circuit. Again, this is a very old image. It's not correct, but it is enough for a basic visual representation of what's going on. So you can see that the tube is intercepting the aura of the hands, and that is modulating the signal inside of this particular diagram or pyramid. And again, the quest to understand how a quartz crystal works and how quartz crystals aren't actually local, but in the dimensions. Atomically, they're local, but the coordinates are in a place of no distance or space or time. And this, I guess, was an attempt to try and explain that at the time. Again, it failed, but visually it does have a representation and value which is of some use. And again, another circuit of, similar to the other one, of how the third and fourth dimension must be synchronized, and the components operating in the fourth dimension and the components operating of the pyramid in the third dimension. So I've just split the transducers down the middle to see the mirror action of what's actually going on. And it seems kind of complex, but this is the best way I could try and depict it at the time. So that's pretty much it. That's a little slideshow of the history of everything. And yeah, that's I guess where it began. All of this work illustrated is over 10 years old. So this is the very beginning. It becomes more advanced as time goes by, but that is it. And I hope you enjoyed the show.